Friday to you. Thanks so much for listening to the Agent Survival Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Ruppel, and it is Friday, August 16th. Last week, I had the privilege of attending the Global Leadership Summit. It's an annual conference for leaders all over the world, and over the course of 2 days, I got to listen to the sage wisdom of successful business leaders from a few different industries. So naturally, I thought I would bring some takeaways back here to the podcast and share some of those nuggets of wisdom with you. So here we go with my 5 takeaways from the Global Leadership Summit. Number 5. We'll start out with one that is literally ripped from the script of some of the trailers for the Global Leadership Summit. I'm glad they mention it because I think sometimes we forget this one, and that is the idea that everyone has influence. Everyone has influence, even if that's not in your job title or description. You don't have to have people under you to be able to lead. You don't have to wait until you get a certain promotion or that specific title to be a leader. You can lead people without those things. Some of us know early on that we want to be leaders. We want to inspire others, teach others, pass on our wisdom. Some of us want nothing to do with being a leader. Some of us have to be talked into it. But regardless of whether we do or don't want to, regardless of the size of our ambition or the lack thereof, we all have influence. It's very easy to get inside your head and start thinking that because I don't have this title or this position, I'm not blank enough. So many of the presentations at this year's Global Leadership Summit focused on mindset. And I think it's easier than ever to get pulled toward negativity. And whether we like to admit it or not, that negativity can worm its way into our own thoughts. And then if our thoughts are circling around in our minds long enough, we can start believing those thoughts, and they affect the way we act. And if we all have influence, well, then we probably need to be a little bit more concerned about who we're influencing and how. Number 4. If you asked me for a common thread in the people who have influenced me the most, the 2 words that come to mind are tough love. Those who spoke truth into my life, made me work hard, didn't let me settle, and called me out for behavior that wasn't going to serve me, let alone anyone else. And I feel like we all need that honesty in our lives. Whether it comes from our parents, our spouse, our boss, or a coworker, candid conversations rooted in truth that are meant to point us to somewhere better than the path that we are currently on. Groeschel kicked off the whole summit with a keynote just like that, giving leaders permission to obsess. Sometimes, as leaders, we can lose sight of where we're going. Maybe we're suffering from burnout. Perhaps we're dealing with limited resources. We're second-guessing ourselves, or maybe we're starting to listen to those voices telling us to conform. But when did conformity ever lead to innovation? When did average ever change the world? According to Groeschel, quote, "People will cheer on your passions, but they'll talk you out of your obsessions," end quote. Ouch. And I say ouch because if we really think about that, it's true. I know I've experienced that before. But what if, instead of thinking of our drive as being a bad thing, what if we looked at it from the mindset that we were given that little bit extra for a reason? What if we took that obsession, that drive, and directed it strategically toward our people and our work? Focusing on what needs our attention, delegating the rest, and not being afraid to say no. Caring deeply about people, both those who work with us and those whom we serve. Whether that is other agents, businesses, or consumers looking to find insurance coverage. And then committing to what we're doing, because as Groeschel said, quote, apathy makes excuses. Obsession finds a way, end quote. If we don't challenge ourselves to do something differently, to act differently, to work differently, to lead differently, how can we expect different results? It's okay to be extremely driven. It's okay to have high standards. It's okay to dream huge and set a path to get there. It's okay to, in a world of people who are happy to settle for mid and meh, to want more and be a little bit obsessed about it. Number 3, next up, we have a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is storytelling. We've talked about it before here on the podcast, how the power of stories can help you connect with clients and prospects. Humans are naturally drawn to stories because they add an extra layer of relatability. They help us to understand. And when you're dealing with something that's, well, not always as interesting as insurance can be, a story can go a long way. And the great thing about stories is that we all have them. But if we're not in the business of storytelling, well, we might not know how to source those stories. Our next takeaways come from Kendra Hall, who does specialize in storytelling for business. She had 2 strategies for finding your stories, and those are the nuggets that I would like to share. 2 ways to find your story. The first, make a list of your values. When did you see those values in action? What happened? Were those values ever tested? How were they tested? What was the end result? And then the second strategy, make a list of important people in your life. What did they teach you? How did they influence you? What words of wisdom did they pass on to you? After you've made both of those lists, you should have at least a handful of potential stories that can add personality to your presentations. And full disclosure, I have not done this yet, but I do plan on going through this exercise myself and see what I come up with. I have a feeling I might be able to get some episode ideas from thinking through this prompt. Number 2, our next bit of wisdom comes from Mariah Smallbone, a singer, songwriter, and actress. She performed one of her songs at the conference and was interviewed afterward, talking about her background and how she got into songwriting. When the conversation moved into her creative process, my ears perked up a little bit. It's always interesting hearing how other creatives work, how they find motivation and inspiration. And she doesn't wait until creativity strikes to write. She's very disciplined, and she sets aside time for writing. She has studio hours, much like we have office hours, and that is her time to write songs. What she writes during that time might be good. It might be great. It might be bad. It's not about the quality of what's created during that time frame. It's the discipline of doing the work. I've heard the same sentiment echoed by many best-selling authors. The only way to write a novel is to dedicate time to writing every day, to make writing a habit. You have to put in the time, and you have to do the work. And the same holds true for many other endeavors. This is not just a sentiment for writers. It's a great reminder that if you are waiting for creativity, inspiration, motivation, or something else to strike before acting, you might be waiting for a while. And that brings us to number 1. We cannot talk about leadership without talking about communication. These 2 concepts go hand in hand because it's difficult to lead without open communication. And that has led to all sorts of assessments that are designed to help us communicate with others more effectively. Each one asks a series of questions about our personality, behaviors, talents, or temperaments. Our answers get sorted into buckets and scored, and we are then placed into different groups. We then learn how our group relates to the other groups. And you've likely heard of these assessments, possibly even taken one or several of them. Probably the most well-known is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, but there's also the Keirsey Temperament Sorter, the Hogan Personality Inventory, the Big Five, the Enneagram Framework, the DISC Assessment, and Clifton Strengths, to name a few. And now there's another to add to the mix, from Erwin McManus, the 7 Frequencies of Communication. Not only is this an assessment, it's also a book with the subtitle, The Hidden Language of Human Connection. The concept is that there's more to human communication than just the words that we speak. It's how we say those words, the tone we use, and then what that tone says to the person hearing it, how they process and respond to what they've heard, and then how all of that communication affects us and changes us. According to McManus, we listen in layers, and that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Sometimes our words don't match our tone. Sometimes we don't interpret tone correctly, and communication can get super messy. He posits that there are 7 frequencies of communication in humans. Each one brings something to the table and gives something to others. For example, the motivator transmits energy and infuses self-belief. A motivator brings an elevated level of energy with them everywhere they go. They readily give that energy to others, lifting them up, infusing self-belief. The other frequencies include the challenger, the commander, the healer, the professor, the seer, and the maven. And like the other assessments I just mentioned, the idea is that once you know your frequency, you can communicate more effectively. Here at Ritter Insurance Marketing, we have all taken the official DISC assessment, so I know where I fall on that scale, and that's been a very helpful tool. I probably should mention that most of these assessments can be found in unofficial form online, and while they're not as pinpoint accurate as the official tests, you can get a starting point if you're looking for areas to improve. In addition to DISC, I've also taken a few of the other unofficial tests online. And since I'm an elder millennial, I can also tell you that my Hogwarts house is and will probably always be Ravenclaw. The point of these assessments is not to put you into a box or define you as only this or just that. For me, I look at them as a fun way to learn more about myself and how I interact with others. And while I think I have an idea what my frequency might be based on some of the descriptions, I won't know for sure until I actually take the assessment. I did order both the book and the test, so I'm looking forward to digging into the details of the frequencies and learning more. When I do, I will definitely report back here. Not sure if that will be in the form of a full review or just a Friday 5 mention in the future, but I would encourage you to follow along with our show to make sure you don't miss out on that. And if you're interested in learning more about the 7 frequencies of communication from Erwin McManus, be sure to check out the episode notes. We'll also have links to resources from some of the other speakers I mentioned. Most of them have books, some of them have podcasts, but they're all leaders in their industries, and they all have a lot of insight we can learn from. I know I did, and I hope you did as well. That's all we've got for this week's episode. I hope you have a great weekend. Stay healthy and stay safe out there, and we will see you next week. The Agent Survival Guide podcast is a production of Ritter Insurance Marketing, an integrity company. This episode was written and produced by me, Sarah Ruppel. Script editing and fact check by Tina Lamoureux. Podcast design by Erwin Rivera. Artwork by Vivian Zhao. Follow along with us wherever you like to listen.